Okay. Hi, everyone. I am so sorry. We're having a little bit of tech issues. I hope you all are doing well. We're here with our lovely friend, Dr. Reshma Shah. Give me 1 minute. I'll make sure that everybody is on board so that we can have this conversation started. I am terribly sorry, but sometimes things don't go your way. So the challenge is how well you can stay calm and not panic during these moments. But we're super excited to have Dr. Reshma Shah join us today so we can talk about her book and this wonderful journey that she's on.
Their experiences. As I said earlier, there are a lot of people in the realm of nutrition, but some of the two of the people that we respect tremendously are the ones that you will see this month.
Yeah.
They are people who have actually dealt with this at the research level, at the clinical level, at the patient and community level. So we're excited to have the conversations, multiple of them, and to kind of get their perspective and their solutions that they've lived through and shared with you guys. So with that, let's see.
Absolutely. All right. Let me just go ahead and do this. Perfect. Okay. I think everybody has access to the screen. They're actually seeing what I'm doing here, all the craziness that's going on. But here we are with Dr. Reshma Shah. Okay, Reshma, thank you so much for being patient with us. This is remarkable. It's wonderful to have you here. I know that everybody's super excited that you're here with us today, and really excited that we chose your book, Nourish, as the book of the month. And we wanted our community members to go over the book because I truly believe, and both Dean and I believe, that this is such an amazing resource that you've created. So thank you for this beautiful gift.
Oh, it's such an honor to be here today, and I have long admired your work and all that you do.
That's very kind of you. Thank you so much. All right. So maybe we can actually start the conversation by just asking you, how did you decide to write the book, and what was the background, and how did you get onto this journey?
So I think like a lot of physicians who end up in the plant-based world, the plant-based community, my story is a little bit different. I often would hear these stories of people who grew up on dairy farms and they ate the standard American diet, and then they saw the light and things kind of shifted for them. And for me, it was a little bit different. I actually grew up in a vegetarian household, and even though we didn't call it, it was essentially plant-based at the time. I'm Indian, and so that's how my family ate. And I think a lot of the influences of just, being a kid in America, I wanted to be like everybody else. And so for a long, long time, I was very far from being plant-based. And I think it's actually when I started having kids of my own and really started to pay attention to how I was feeding. When we're in residency and we're working all these crazy hours, it's really like, how fast can I get the food and what's available at the hospital?
Yeah.
But when you are responsible for feeding these two small humans, automatically your thinking around it changes and you become much more aware. And so I thought, well, I haven't been paying much attention to it. And certainly my patients are having these same questions. And so slowly I started to make some changes at home. And the more I was making changes at home, the more inspired I felt to sort of actually have more conversations with my patients about it. And so it's kind of a gradual process. And in terms of writing the book, for the longest time, I've been going to a lot of these plant-based conferences, and you're not going to believe this story, but I was going to one of these conferences and flying from San Francisco to LA, and you would not believe who was sitting next to me on the plane.
Oh, who?
Well,
It was
Brenda.
Oh my goodness.
So she was sitting next to me on the plane, and the two of us chatted the entire flight and, kind of stayed connected. And then the following year we met again at the conference, and, we were just talking about pediatrics, and I've admired her for so long, and she's done so much in the plant-based community. And I was asking her for some advice, and I said, how did you do it all? And she said, well, we could do the book together. And that's how Nourish came to be. And I vividly remember I was so excited on my flight home, I started jotting down the notes for the book. And that's where I outlined the chapters for the book. So that's kind of how the book came to be. And I think what Brenda and I really wanted to do is I would get frustrated when I would read things and they would say, specifically about nutrition, and
Yeah.
they say ask your pediatrician.
Mm.
And I think you don't ask your pediatrician because your pediatrician probably doesn't know, because I
Yeah.
didn't know.
Yeah.
And so we wanted to create a resource so that parents could be successful, so
Mhm.
they could have confidence. And honestly, for me, one of those gratifying things is when I hear other pediatricians saying, I found your book too valuable.
Yeah.
Because I think it's a reference point for them as well. So our goal in writing it is no matter where people are, where families are, even physicians in the plant-based spectrum,
Mhm.
they could find information that was reliable, that was evidence-based, but that was also compassionate and inviting.
Yeah.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Amazing. And that's exactly the feeling you get when you read the book.
Exactly. One of the things that I'm interested in is the journey, the each individual's journey, especially somebody who's an expert in the field of nutrition, because your journey is reflective of so many other people's journeys out there. By the journey, I don't mean the things we do on that are not related so much to nutrition and lifestyle, but the kind of things that actually brought you to the world of healthcare when you were younger. What were the drivers? What were the impediments? And then I would like to take that journey in childhood and then also then come to the journey during medical school and everything, because that mindset speaks to this evolution of people being ready for the next step in healthcare, to the next step in their journey, to the next step in their improvement of their healthcare. It's never a end all be all kind of a behavior. It's small incremental eureka moments. It's small incremental moments of awareness, and that matters. So I want to kind of, given that you guys have written this amazing book together, and from your perspective, tell me about your experience with nutrition as in childhood. I mean, there's one thing that's unique to you, which wasn't to us. We were heavy duty meat eaters when we were young.
Absolutely.
But you grew up vegetarian. So, and especially with hindsight being 2020, with the knowledge you have now, looking back, what are the positives, what are the negatives, what are the impediments? What are the things that you learned that you could bring from that childhood to today?
That's such a wonderful question. I don't think I've ever been asked that before, but I would say one of the things, when I look back, my mom graduated high school. She never went to college. When they moved to the United States, she really couldn't speak much English, and so she really was the foundation for a lot of what I knew about cooking and food. And she cooked very simple foods. We had like lentils and dal and vegetables and rice, and she would probably spend the better part of her day making dinner. And I remember very clearly, we sat down together as a family every single night for dinner.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think that in some ways I sort of did a disservice to my mother, because I think medical school and early residency training undid a lot of what I learned, right? It was, my mother knew that it was about cooking simple whole foods, seasonal foods with traditional recipes, lots of spices. And I remember thinking, I'm going to medical school. I'm learning all these things. I know about lean protein and chicken and fish and how all these things are healthy, and that's what we need for health. And really, my mom was right all along. And I think the way that sort of influences the way that I look at, the vast majority of my career, I've worked in low-income, underserved communities. The last position I was in was a huge immigrant population. And I think if you go back to their culture of what they know about food and what they know about family, really, that we've known it for so long. It's just kind of remembering those basic principles. And in every culture, you can kind of find some of those things. And so I have a whole new appreciation for my mother, and her, and it wasn't fancy ingredients, and she didn't spend a lot of money, and she was very frugal with how she spent the food budget. And I think that those are the same things that I kind of go back to now. And so when people talk about plant-based diets being so difficult, or they're just too expensive, or all these things, I just think about my mother, who graduated high school, and she pretty much had it right all along. And so I think the regret that I have is that I didn't pay closer attention when I was younger, because now I find myself calling her, Mom, how do you make this thing, and what are the steps? And so I wish I had paid closer attention. And I think it's changing, because I think my kids are much more capable in the kitchen than I was at their age. And so just trying to go back to some of those traditions and focusing on, seasonal ingredients, cooking simply, and a really strong focus on family dinner. I think it's like one of the most important things. But if we get back to that, a lot of the other stuff will sort of come to the table as well.
I love that.
I don't think,
Yeah.
I think having dinner with your family is not just about food. It's about
Oh.
so much more.
Yeah.
It's about
whole chapter devoted just to that topic.
yeah,
Yeah.
and I love that. I love that this book is not just about the food that goes into your body, but the act of creating your own food, the choosing part, the eating together part, all of it plays a major role in our health. And Dean and I always talk about this this conscious effort to make every act bigger than what it is, because our brain functions that way. We don't just eat food; we see it, we smell it, we share it with our loved ones, and it all has a major impact on brain health.
That one beautifully stated. Making it bigger means basically making it simpler in a way. What you just said is that the food that you were eating, your mother had a set budget, and it was at the time, it was basically the healthiest food, and that's true for most of the cultures, like you said. If you go to traditional foods, they were unprocessed. They had very little of the bad products that we talk about, and they were simple, very simple, and they were healthy. And in fact, if you look back across all of the cultures that we looked at, the different elements of it, it comes down to the basic foods, which is greens, beans, and all of that stuff, which surprises me whenever we have these conversations. And outside of certain settings, the first statement we hear is, oh, eating healthy is very expensive. Well, the reason that the expensive part comes in, because we live, in Beverly Hills and Los Angeles and New York and all these big cities, is because we add these other terms like organic and made out of, we add complexity to it. Even if we go just to the traditional foods, we will have significantly improved the diet, profoundly.
Absolutely.
Where, what we do is we usually do a binary thing, all or none, perfection or back to nothingness, back to the worst food. If we realize that a stepwise approach where we go to the traditional foods that are available in your local market and you build a good staple around that, it's actually cheaper, it's healthier, and in many ways it's tastier too. So, but that's beautiful that you brought your kitchen table and how you had this thing with around the kitchen table with your mom. That's where health starts in many ways.
Yeah, absolutely.
Amazing. So I actually have a list of questions that I personally was very interested in learning. Maybe we'll start with that. You're a physician. You see families, you see parents, you see children, and you also see the impact of our lifestyle on health. You see it from both perspectives, being a mother and someone who has a family, and as a physician from the other side, where you see the science of what lifestyle does to our health. And with the knowledge that you have right now, do you find it difficult sometimes to share that information and message with families who are not really privy to it or who don't have access to this information?
No, I think it's, I think when you're sort of working with families, working with patients, I think the first thing you have to do is to understand that every family, every patient comes through the door with their own set of circumstances. Mm-hmm. They have a set of strengths, they have a set of challenges, and I try to be very careful to not presume to know what those challenges might be for them. And so trying to get a sense of where they're looking for support, asking permission to participate in the conversation. And I think especially in primary care, it's a series of conversations. It's not, I'm here to give you this information, you will take the information and do what I said, and your health will improve. It's about forming a relationship, gaining trust, and over time supporting them in ways. And I think the easiest way is when they come in with a clinical situation that can immediately be impacted by some of these lifestyle modifications. And in pediatrics, the thing that comes through the door most often is constipation. And I think, you're going to see that. And I think constipation is kind of like the canary in the coal mine.
Right.
Lots of things that are going on. So broadly speaking, if you say, especially in kids, oh, this is a healthier lifestyle. I think sometimes if families are not in a position to either have the resources to make some of those changes or in a place where they can take it in, helping them deal with the immediate problems that are right there and the reason that they're coming through the door is the easiest way in.
Yeah.
Another thing that I found is that oftentimes I'd be surprised how often you could have a conversation about something, headaches or ADHD or strep throat, whatever it may be. And when they sense that they have a compassionate listener on the other end, more likely to want to talk about other things. I remember one time I was seeing a family and they came in, I think, for just a viral URI. And, I spent some time just talking to them about it. And at the end of the conversation, the mother says, let me ask you a question. Do you think what I'm feeding them could have anything to do with what's going on with his health issues? And I think that those conversations take time. They require a building of trust. And they require that the family knows that you're there to support them and not sort of
judge.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
That's amazing. Yeah, I think from in neurology in our clinic, I think I suppose the feeling and the reason to come and seek for help is essentially the same thing. People want to make sure that they get the best for their children or for their loved ones. But sometimes the conversation to connect what people do every single day to what they're experiencing chronically can be challenging.
Yeah.
And I always want to learn more about ways to close that gap and to make it an impactful meeting, because unfortunately our system doesn't really support long conversations. It's always quick. It's 15 minutes or 20 minutes at the most, right? And so I think it almost becomes an art of being able to convey that information in a loving, compassionate, empowering way.
Yeah.
So I love the fact that you have a book where you can actually point them. It's like, hey, I wrote a book, and you can actually go and have access to it. That's incredible. Do you have experience with children and with families who actually do well with changing their lifestyle and their diet?
Yeah, so over the last, actually right now I'm not clinically active, and over the last few years I've been working more sort of in the urgent care setting, so I haven't had that sort of long-term follow-up. But I think things like constipation, eczema, allergies, those kinds of things, you can see some pretty immediate impacts. And the way that I will phrase it with parents is I think that when you ask them to make changes that seem really, really difficult or challenging, it can be overwhelming. And so one of the best ways to phrase it is that they have a choice. And like you said, Dave, it's not all or nothing, and it's not about being perfect. So for instance, like with constipation, I'll say, let's try it for 2 weeks.
Yeah.
And either it's going to make some difference or it'll make no difference. And if it doesn't make any difference, then we'll think about the next step. Let's really try it for 2 weeks. And that's where they get a sense of empowerment. Like, okay, I can do this for 2 weeks. And it goes right back to what you said. I think that families and patients have to feel empowered, that they have some say and some control over their health issues, and that they can gain non-judgmental support from their providers.
I would like to actually halt the conversation here from going forward, and I want to stick to constipation. That sentence has not been heard in a while, but I want to stick to the constipation, because it's such a universal problem, isn't it? In my populations, in our populations, in your population, it's such a universal thing. And people, and you said it, but I want to just restate the two pivotal things you said. Constipation is the canary in the coal mine. It foretells, it presages, it predicts problems. There are problems that are not just having to do with movement of bowel, but with so much more beyond that. All the chemical, and I'll summarize, and I would love you to add on to that as well, as far as the mechanisms of constipation, but also the fact that it's because it tells you so much ahead of time. There's even a minimal change in that gives you. We always look for behavioral points of true change as far as behavior is concerned. That means that when somebody sees an impact, that's the motivator. That gets them going. For a lot of things, it's difficult. For sleep, it's difficult. I have to say, I mean, we work with people with sleep disorders. That's an area of passion for us, to help people with their sleep. Sleep is difficult. And we tell them that it's going to take a while for you to see an effect. There are some tricks here and there that can give you that. But for exercise, the morning walk is amazing. That's the thing. For nutrition, one area to see outcome, the reason I'm kind of perseverating on this concept is constipation, because constipation is so important. It affects so many other things, and I think I've had some success, and I know you guys have had some success in changing people's diet just quick enough where they see an effect in constipation, and that gets them going. I know that has so many puns. We're not gonna go there yet, but it just gets the flow going.
You're
Yeah,
getting to that dad joke
I
status.
know.
again.
I'm not. No,
Yeah.
those are not dad jokes. Those are real good jokes. You guys are just mislabeling them. But yeah, so I think I would love to hear some bit about constipation, and yeah.
Rishma, sorry to cut you off. Your volume is on the little lower side. Do you mind? Do you have any control over that?
Is that better?
A little better, yes.
Okay, I just moved my microphone a little closer.
Yeah, that would be really nice. This some of the audiences are not hearing your voice. No, but it's actually much better now. Go ahead.
Okay.
Thank you.
I'm
Thank
getting
you.
also, like, this weird cast from my window.
It looks great. Don't worry about it.
I won't worry about it. So I would say in pediatrics, I would distinguish it between sort of more acute constipation and chronic constipation. Obviously, you're going to do the history and the workup to make sure you're not missing some more severe underlying conditions.
Yeah.
For the vast majority of children, I think constipation is more of a functional thing. There's no obstruction. There's no medical reason for them to be constipated. So with chronic constipation, I have not had experience with diet alone resolving the issue. So with chronic constipation, I think it's been going on for a long time. And typically, I will not send a child that is significantly constipated out of the office without some immediate relief in therapy in terms of either medication or just something to really get things going acutely. And the way that I explain it to parents is we have to take care of the immediate problem. And then gradually, we want to make some dietary changes because I don't want your child to be on this medication chronically for the rest of their lives. So I think that I have used things like Miralax and lactose and other things to sort of relieve the constipation.
I got it. Sorry. Go ahead.
I've seen kids who are on Miralax for years at a time.
Wow.
For years at a time without having any dietary intervention. So with chronic constipation, sometimes you do need to do sort of more aggressive maneuvers just to provide immediate relief. I mean, I've had patients admitted to the hospital for bowel planouts for constipation.
Wow.
For such a long time. And it impacts their whole life. It impacts their school, it impacts their ability to go to sleepovers or to, and in pediatrics, a lot of times they can have overflow incontinence. So, they're so constipated that they actually have leakage of stool around the constipation. And so they can't go to sleepovers. They have difficulty with sports. And it sounds like such a silly thing to be talking about, but it really can have an enormous impact on the quality of life of a child.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So for chronic constipation, I think it's important to sort of do whatever necessary medical intervention. Sometimes it means even getting admitted to the hospital if it's been going on for a long time. But then as you're sort of treating them medically, you want to begin to make some dietary changes so you can gradually move away from the medications.
Does that apply to adults as well, sometimes with chronic constipation?
I imagine so. Luckily, I have not had to treat adults with chronic constipation.
I would imagine, right?
Yeah.
I would imagine. I mean, people have definitely been admitted for cleanouts just for constipation.
Yeah.
And think about it. Actually having to be admitted to the hospital for 1, 2, 3 days because of something that's preventable.
Yeah, absolutely. This is wonderful because I think it also points to the importance of understanding that, sometimes when chronic conditions linger for a lot longer than they should, changing your lifestyle may not be the only thing that you need. You actually need a little more than that.
Yeah.
There's a little bit of resistance in that realm too. Let's switch gears and talk about families in general. So we have a lot of our members who actually have questions about maybe family member, an adult child living with them, or a spouse not really being on board with change, being on board with becoming, a healthy eater, not necessarily plant-based, but plant predominant, or adding more healthy foods in there. And I can't tell you how many times I actually hear that. And as someone working with families, what is your experience, and what do you do in those situations?
Well, I can definitely talk about this from a personal perspective too, because my family was not fully on board when I decided to sort of make the change. And I think there are a few things you can do. A lot of it is going to depend on the age of the children. So the younger they are, the more control you have over sort of what's coming into the house and those sorts of things. But if you've got older children or a partner that's really not on board, I think the first thing you can do is to find common ground. Where can you find some agreement? And so, for instance, it might be that in the home, I'm not going to purchase these things. Or maybe they could agree to 2 to 3 nights a week doing a vegetarian or vegan meal.
Mm-hmm.
So the first thing I think is to focus on common ground. Because if you're starting from a point of conflict, every step is going to be sort of an uphill battle.
Mm-hmm.
So work on finding points of compromise. And then my secret weapon actually is to cook really good food.
Yes.
Right? If you're cooking good food, if people are happy about coming to the dinner table, they're not gonna. I think kids especially, they don't really care if it's plant-based, or they just want the food to taste good.
Yeah.
So find points of compromise, work on creating really delicious meals. And then I think if there is a lot of tension and a lot of disagreement, the minimum thing I think you can do is ask for respect. Ask for some respect and some support, so that your efforts to sort of make changes in your own diet are not being sabotaged.
Yeah. And that's why there's so many lovely recipes at the back of your book, and they're just so good. I've actually made the curry, and I've made the roasted pepper and tomato soup, and it's amazing. So you're absolutely right. I think change comes when you provide tasty foods, and easy, tasty, and healthy foods. That's what we say.
It is
for them every week.
all behavior. Sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say, whenever I'm talking about a variety of aspects of pediatrics, whether it's feeding or discipline or a variety of things, I always think about like this tug of war. So if you imagine a tug of war, I've got one end of the rope, you've got the other, we're both pulling, and there's so much tension. What happens when I let go of my end? There's no more tension. So I think in trying to sort of diffuse the tension and easing into it, I think it creates a more harmonious relationship.
Yeah.
Especially with kids, when you're struggling with like, I want you to eat this, and there's so much back and forth. I promise you, when you sort of ease up, it gives them permission to sort of explore and try new things. And it just creates a lot less stress and tension at the dinner table.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And definitely, we don't want that, because first of all, it stops behavior change. It stops learning. It closes minds whenever there's tension. If it's it's a collaborative. One of the ways that I see is starting a conversation and together exploring the truth, or the path that's most amenable or most beneficial for everybody. And of course, part of that conversation is taste. That should be part of that.
Yeah,
the part of that
absolutely.
Conversation is their involvement in this. Part of the conversation is the big elephant in the room, diseases that, as we get older, we experience them, as with younger people, it's attention deficit and and mood disorders, which are profoundly affected by food. So it should definitely, under worst conditions, should be conversational, and under best conditions, it should be conversations that they start, and they start conversations when they have people like you, who are dealing with it in the hospital, or cooking great food. That's anything that starts conversations is fantastic. Literally creating the venue, the modem, the environment for conversations is the solution for all of this, especially when it comes to nutrition. We whenever we have gatherings in our home, and we have quite a few of them, we have created the space upstairs and outdoor.
Hopefully when you come, we'll have you over.
Aisha makes amazing food, but we never push the concepts, and it's almost bar none that somebody brings up the question and we don't even push there. They actually lead the conversation themselves. So it's yeah.
All right. So I guess for people who have had experience with being on plant-based diet and feeding their families a plant-based diet, or a plant-exclusive diet, I think they're very well aware of potential deficiencies, or making sure that the food is wholesome, that it consists of different varieties of foods that provide minerals and vitamins and so on and so forth. And unfortunately, out in the society, there's a perception that if children are on a plant exclusive diet, that they may be deficient in certain things. And we've seen papers coming out from the Oxford study and from other places where there's almost like a fear mongering that it's not healthy for children to be on a plant-based diet. I wanted to hear what your thoughts are on that.
Yeah, so one of the first things I'll say is that there's this idea that if you're raising your child on a plant-based diet, that you have to be so careful and so precise with all of your nutrients. And the reality is that we have to be thoughtful about what we're feeding our children, regardless of the diet.
Exactly.
So as a pediatrician, I have treated kids for iron deficiency anemia. I've treated kids for rickets because of vitamin D deficiency.
Wow.
I've treated kids for growth failure because of inadequate caloric intake. So I've treated all, and none of them were vegan, none of them were plant-based. So it is true that plant-based children, we have to pay specific attention to some nutrients. But that's the case for all children.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So that's one thing.
Beautiful.
Another thing that I think in the plant-based community, there's this idea sometimes that if I feed my child a perfect whole food plant-based diet, I don't have to worry about any nutrients, which is equally untrue. I think that, using fortified foods, using appropriate supplements, just really ensures your chance for success. And so we shouldn't be afraid, or we shouldn't think the diet is inferior because it requires supplementation or fortification of certain foods. And there are some key ones that I like plant-based parents to specifically focus on, and we can talk about them. I think both things we have to be careful. It's not true that plant-based diets are deficient in nutrients and that you have to be scared of these headlines. But it's also not true that if you just do rice and beans and grains, you're not going to have to worry about anything. That's also not true. Especially during various developmental stages, kids have specific needs for nutrients that we need to make sure that they're getting.
Absolutely.
I love that. But can you kind of hone in on some of the nutrients that are important for children and for adolescents?
So I mean, the first one, which we probably don't even have to talk about, because I'm sure you've talked about so much, is B12. That's a no-brainer. You just have to ensure an adequate source of B12. And for kids, what that means is if mom is breastfeeding and if she's taking adequate B12, the baby will be getting B12. All commercial infant formula has B12, even the plant-based ones, so you don't have to worry about it. And then once they're no longer breastfeeding or formula feeding, you have to ensure that they're getting B12. For kids, I tend to like to use a supplement just because, during the toddler years, their intake can be so sporadic. So one day they'll eat something, the next. So relying on fortified foods, especially when you have a child that's not eating consistently the same foods. So that one's easy. B12 is an absolute must. You must either, ensure adequate intake through fortified foods or supplements. So that one for me is like the easiest.
Yeah.
In my mind, there's no controversy.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And then I would say and vitamin D is similar. Even for breastfed infants, you want to make sure they have to start vitamin D right away. Again, I've seen lots of kids with rickets. Enough kids with rickets that it has stayed in my mind.
That's fascinating.
Yeah.
Yeah. It is fascinating. I worked in Cleveland for many, many years, and our patient population, we had a lot of African American patients, and I have darker pigmented skin, so I have problems with my vitamin D. And in Cleveland, it's dark for so many months of the year that we really did see a lot of vitamin D deficiency. And then iron also becomes an issue for infants. So between the ages of 4 to 6 months, around 6 months of age, babies' iron stores naturally start to come down. And so in the last trimester of pregnancy, they're getting a lot of iron, and then those stores start to gradually decline by 6 months of age. So this isn't actually universal all throughout the world, but in the United States, the American Academy of Pediatrics recommends between 4 to 6 months of age for babies that are being breastfed to do supplemental iron, and then really to consider doing iron-rich foods as the first food. So I've seen this push, even in advertisements in the AP, for beef being the first foods of baby because they're iron rich.
Yeah.
And when you do a comparison, beef actually, it does have iron, but it would be really difficult for a baby to get its iron needs through beef alone. They would have to eat. Brenda did the calculations. It was like 22 tablespoons of beef to meet their iron requirement.
Wow.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it's it's a very large quantity. So we recommend that usually for first foods to include infant cereals that are fortified with iron. That's a great way to ensure adequate iron intake.
Yeah.
And that's true for all babies, not just plant-based babies.
Right.
And then beyond that, I think the one, especially with a lot of studies that have come out just in the past year that have looked at bone mineral content of children and things like that, I would say one of the other nutrients that I would focus on is calcium. The RDAs for calcium for children in the United States are actually quite a bit higher than they are in Europe. And it would be difficult for children to meet the RDA for calcium just eating calcium-rich foods like, tahini and those kinds of things. So I think choosing a plant-based milk that's fortified with calcium, like a cup of plant-based milk that's fortified will have 300 to 450 milligrams of calcium. Which is a lot.
It really is. Yeah.
So I recommend fortified plant-based milk. And then beyond that, some of the other things like iodine and zinc and things like that, I think you have to pay a little bit of attention, but they're not quite as significant. And then I think the last one, and I'm sure you'll have a lot to say about this, is omega-3 fatty acids. And, I think in pregnancy and lactation, I think there's enough data to really consider taking a DHA EPA supplement. And then beyond that, I think it's a little bit of a personal choice, like whether your family consumes some fish, how many ALA-rich foods you're doing. I think for a lot of kids, taking a ton of like chia and flax and hemp sometimes can be challenging. Lots of kids are also allergic to nuts, so walnuts are off the table for some families. So I think, definitely in pregnancy and lactation, Brenda and I recommend an algae-based supplement. And then beyond that, I think, parents can kind of make their own decision. A lot of times people want to know, what do you do with your kids? And I do give them a DHA and EPA algae-based supplement. I'm sure there's some I'm forgetting about, but those are the ones off the top of my head.
Amazing.
With omega-3, the data is not clean yet. It needs to be much better delineated. Much more work has to be done to clearly delineate what, if we need it, at what age and to what extent and how much even.
Right.
All of that. But when we did the review on omega-3 in the developing brain and another one on omega-3 in the aging brain, on both of them, there's strong trends. And when you don't have perfect data, trends say a lot. So there are strong trends that say that for developing brains, omega-3 supplementation may be helpful. If you're getting a lot of fish or some other source of omega, that's great. But supplementation may be needed, given that omega-3 is the only fat that the brain needs. And the brain is developing massively and exponentially at those beginning years. Even actually, myelination continues to happen up to the age of 20, 21, and so on. I think omega-3 supplementation may be needed. So we also, and our children, take a algae-based omega-3 for those purposes.
Yeah, absolutely. That was fantastic. What are some of the things? What are some of the major myths about protein that you hear for children and adolescents? And I think the same applies for adults. And in your book, you've actually talked about the needs for competitive adolescent athletes, so those who need a higher amount. What are your thoughts about that? Because that's a big fight, isn't it?
Yeah. So I think there's this idea that animal protein just has higher quality protein. It's just a better protein. And I think when you consider the negative impacts of lots of protein coming from animals, but with saturated fat and cholesterol and all these things and all the other, antibiotics and hormones that come to it, there are some negative impacts. I think the biggest myths are that one is that plant proteins don't contain all the essential amino acids, which is not true. All plants contain all 9 essential amino acids. And then there's this myth of, that they have to be combined precisely. You have to eat this with this so that you have complete proteins. And we also know that's not true. Now, I think that rice and beans is a delicious combination, and that's why you should eat them together. But I don't think you have to stress to make sure that when you're eating your rice that it has beans, to make sure that it has the essential amino acids. And I think the other thing I would say is, in the vast majority of time, when people are not able to meet their protein needs on a plant-based diet, it stems from 2 problems. One is not enough variety in the food. So if you're only eating, just one type of, like just grains or just focusing on this. And then the second issue is not eating enough calories. So I think if you're really restricted with your calories, it can be difficult to meet your protein requirements. But for children in general, if you're providing them with enough quantity of food and enough variety of foods, it's very easy to meet their protein requirements.
Yeah.
We definitely agree.
We know from the two studies, I think in 2019 and 2020, the Vichy youth studies that were published in Germany, it was a comparison of the first study was in children ages 1 to 3, and then the second was in children ages 5 to 19, and they looked at their protein intake, and omnivores did have the highest protein intake, but all children had twice the German reference range, even the vegans, of what they needed in terms of protein. So children are not having difficult time meeting their protein requirements as long as they get variety and enough quantity of food.
Yeah, you don't see a lot of like the kwashiorkor, the protein deficiency that we all read about in textbooks in the United States. Like you said, if you have enough calories, I think you should be fine. Did I say that right?
No,
it's been a while since we've actually said
that's
that
exactly
word
right. Yeah,
Great.
absolutely. I think this myth is the biggest myth that's stopping people from making the change in health, and I think part of the myth is that people want to believe it so that they're sticking to that myth, but the protein is not a problem. Now, as we get older, you should be aware of your protein intake, no matter what diet you have. You need you have to be a little more aware, but that is not dependent on the type of diet in particular. Yeah.
And I think for kids also, like if you're having some challenges, choosing foods that have more digestible protein, so things that are a bit more processed, so like tofu. Tofu has about as much protein per serving as some of the sort of higher quality, like chicken, beef, things like that. So, choosing things that might be a little bit more digestible can be helpful.
What are your thoughts about soy and health? I mean, we always get this concern from patients that soy products have been associated with either it's cancer or some other issues with growth in children and with brain health in adults. I mean, obviously, you get to see poor quality data on almost everything and anything out there. But what are your thoughts? I want to hear you speak about soy and health in general.
So the first thing I would say is you can eat a plant-based diet that does not include soy. So if somebody has really strong feelings and they're like, I will not eat soy, and they've just got it in their mind, there are ways around it. And plenty of children have soy allergies and may not be able to eat soy, which is fine.
Yeah.
So it's absolutely not essential to consume soy on a plant-based diet. Having said that, especially for kids, I think that including soy foods makes it so much easier and delicious. The studies that have been done on soy, when you look at there have been a couple of case reports, but these people were consuming like 20 plus servings of soy a day. You shouldn't be eating 20 plus servings of anything in a day.
Yeah.
But 2 to 3 servings of soy in a day, for younger kids, 2 servings, for older kids, 2 to 3 servings of soy a day. I really haven't seen any adverse health outcomes. And we know from studies that consume quite a bit of soy that it's actually protective in terms of, breast cancer and a variety of other things. So, the real thing about soy is I think it just adds so much versatility and ease to the diet. I would say that my kids request, if I serve tofu every day for dinner, they would be perfect.
Same with us. Same with us.
Yeah, so unless you have a very specific reason, and there are certain situations where you may not want to have soy in the diet, if you're allergic to it, if there are other intolerances, but I think you should have a really good reason for eliminating soy in the diet, especially the diet of a child.
Yeah, I agree with you. There's some concern about soybean isolates versus, as opposed to whole bean consumption being unhealthy. And, like anything that is too processed and too isolated from its source, I think it could potentially be harmful. So if people stick to more unprocessed versions of soy in the forms of tofu or edamame or tempeh, which is my favorite, I think they should be just fine. That's beautiful.
Also with kids, one of the things I like to emphasize is that you also want to create a sense of sort of ease and not anxiety around eating. So if they end up having like a veggie burger that has some of these things every now and then, I tell parents not to worry about it too much. It's not one meal, it's what you do day in and day out at your dinner table that really matters.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
That's very, very true.
Wonderful.
Okay. Kind of a topic or subtopic that is almost divisive in the plant-based world, which is oil. As you know, there are individuals, there are people who are very, very concerned about consumption of oil for good reasons, and especially those who have a lot of atherosclerosis or hardening of their arteries or some sort of a chronic cardiovascular disease. What are your thoughts about oil consumption, seed oil consumption for children and adolescents, and for adults in general?
Yeah, it's interesting because I think Brenda and I even have a slightly different perspective on this issue. I think we agree, and then have like our own little nuances that we believe. So my opinion on oils for children is, if you are a family that does not cook with oil, that does not use oil, and that's how you want to sort of raise your children, I think it's perfectly fine, with the caveat that you cannot restrict fat in the diet of a child, especially a young child. So young children are still getting 30-40% of their calories from fat. So if you are going to exclude oil in your diet, you want to make sure that they're getting plenty of fat in other places. So things like nut and seed butters, avocados. You definitely do not want to be restricting fat in the diet of a child. And even older children, 25-30% of their calories can come from fat. So I think the focus is on whole plant foods, not restricting fat. I think that for younger kids, when you look at some of the studies that looked at problems with growth in vegan and vegetarian children, oftentimes between the ages of 1 and 3. And what ends up happening is the plant-based weaning foods tend to be really high in fiber. Fruits, vegetables, whole grains, beans. We want our kids to be eating all that stuff. But if the diet is too high in fiber, they can't consume enough calories, and they can actually experience growth failure. So sometimes I think fat, using a little olive oil and things like that, putting a little, the way that I use oil is I'm very intentional about how I use it. So if I make a tray of broccoli and it's roasted and I have some wonderful olive oil, it gets eaten like that. It's just so delicious. And for kids, it can actually also help them absorb fat-soluble nutrients. So I'm not afraid to use oil, but we definitely don't deep fry things and pour the oil over things. But I'm very intentional about how I use it. I think it can add to enjoyment of food. It can add flavor. It can help children meet their caloric requirements, especially if they're having difficulty gaining weight. But I tend to I'm just intentional about how you use it. I absolutely do not think it needs to be avoided or eliminated with plant-based diets. And I think for a lot of families, especially if they're starting with more of the standard American diet, and you're saying, no this, no that, no, and then you get down to no oil, it just becomes really hard to sort of attain that. And I think, making things delicious and having, if you have people in the house that are dealing with significant health issues, like heart disease and things like that, and you have to sort of cook differently, those are individual challenges families. But for the garden variety family, where they're not sort of trying to, manage a lot of these chronic conditions, I think using a little bit of oil in your cooking is perfectly fine.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for that. That was very enlightening. And are there any differences in the quality of oil, olive oil versus canola oil, say, for example, or sunflower seed oil? Any differences in health outcomes?
I mean, in kids, there's no data that I know of looking at various oils. There's no studies like that. But I tend to use olive oil, definitely for dressings and for like cooking. If you're going to use nut and seed oils, I think those are best used in a dressing or a drizzle on top because of the smoke point. So you don't want to use high heat cooking with something like a sesame oil because the smoke point is not conducive to that, and it'll break down and it'll create things that you don't want to be enjoying. So, those are the kind of oils that I use.
That makes sense.
High heat cooking, you could use like an avocado oil or something like that.
Yeah, wonderful, wonderful. Yeah, in our population, and from the studies that come from the Mediterranean diet or the Mayan diet, extra virgin olive oil is always highlighted, but the other oils are not highlighted. Although the American College of Cardiology have even included canola oil as the healthier oil in their guideline directed therapies and in their nutrition guidelines at least. So things are changing. We're actually learning more and more. We're getting more and more data on all of these things. It's amazing. Great. All right. So I think I'm gonna go ahead and jump on a couple of very focused questions that some of our community members have had, and you're getting a lot of love. They absolutely love the book. And our friend Lani, she actually makes your food, and she's actually shared pictures of it, and she's absolutely she's a big fan. As far as specific questions are concerned, I think the questions were more about specific micronutrients and health, like vitamin D and calcium. And I know that you actually have a section on vitamin D and calcium and how important it is to take it. And from a brain health perspective, we actually posted something about calcium and how important it is to take enough of it, not just for muscle and bone health, but for brain health in general. So do you recommend vitamin D and calcium as a supplement, or do you more focus on consumption through diet, or a combination thereof?
So vitamin D is really difficult to get. Like, there are very few foods that are naturally high in vitamin D. So even the foods that we think of as being good sources of vitamin D, like cow's milk or something like that, it's fortified. So it's added to it. So for vitamin D, it's either going to be through fortified foods or a supplement. Now, obviously, sun exposure can give you vitamin D, but for a lot of reasons, we want to avoid excessive sun exposure. So I find I don't like to rely on sun exposure for vitamin D. So definitely a vitamin D supplement. And for breastfed infants, you must start, within the first month or so of life. You want to start that vitamin D supplement. And then calcium, I think for kids, the easiest way is really through a fortified plant-based milk. So that it is a supplement, but it's in fortified foods. I think the way that Brenda and I sort of recommend for kids is if you do, let's say, 2 servings of a fortified plant-based milk, you're up to 600 to 900 milligrams of calcium right there. And then if you do some, foods that are high in calcium, then you can meet your calcium requirements. So we don't specifically recommend a calcium supplement like in a pill for kids, but using plant-based milks that are fortified is an excellent way to get calcium intake. And vitamin D, I think, either if you're doing consistently fortified plant-based milks or just a supplement. And I think that sometimes, what is it, 800 IUs for an adult? Most adults need more than that. So even if you're drinking some fortified plant-based milks and then taking, 1 to 2,000 units for adults beyond that, it's still pretty okay.
Yeah. I think you're absolutely right. Much of the supplemental needs can be met through food, especially if we're conscious and aware of how the supply and the source. Some of them we have to potentially supplement even when you pay attention to it, which is what you spoke about, which is omega-3 and the B12. But the rest, I think, by just being more cognizant, you do your body justice. You get enough of those supplements. Oh, those vitamins.
One that I've actually seen has been more of an issue in plant-based families is iodine.
Yeah.
But it used to, most people would get their iodine from iodized salts, but nowadays we're using all kinds of fancy salts, like pink Himalayan and sea salt, and those typically are not fortified with iodine. So that's another one to pay attention to.
Yeah.
You just took the words out of my mouth. That was my next question, because the balance between salt intake and making sure that one gets iodine. And I think in your book you had mentioned that half a teaspoon of iodized salt should suffice the need of an individual adult for iodine. I think that should be enough, and that's beautiful. I always say, people don't like cooking with iodized salt, saying it has a chemically taste to it, but I don't know, I never felt the chemically taste, and I think it's much better to use that instead of the, like you said, the fancy salts that are out in the market.
The other thing I'll say is a lot of people rely on seaweed for their iodine. You just have to be careful in children, because some of those seaweeds can have really high amounts of iodine. And you don't want to exceed the upper limits.
Yeah.
And I also read that the seaweeds and wakame and the seaweeds could potentially be sources of heavy metal too. I mean, unfortunately, we've completely messed up the oceans. And so even though they're plants, they can actually have quite a few, heavy metals like lead and mercury in them. So that's another concern. This is amazing. I mean, I could probably just, eat your ears for another half an hour or so asking you specific questions, but I wanted to kind of focus on a An area that I am most concerned about, and I see that more often, and I probably think you do as well. We talk about nutrition a lot, all of us, on a daily basis, and we have patients and we have individuals we're connected with, and there's sometimes it seems like there's just too much information, right? We talk about all of these things and the levels and so on and so forth, and for the consumer, it can become overwhelming. And I've seen some individuals almost get paralyzed about the content of their protein or calcium and carbohydrates and fibers. And so I step back and tell them, like, yes, it's very important to be in control of what you eat, but also don't paralyze yourself, because food should be about joy. Food should be about nourishing your bodies. And I think that's a question for both of you. I'm posing it for both of you. Rishma, what are your thoughts about that, and how would you approach it? If somebody asked you, like, okay, how do I get this much protein, this much carbohydrate, this much fiber, this much minerals? Like, how do I do that? And how do I create a schedule for myself to make sure that I eat that way?
Well, I think the first thing is to really get a sense of the foods that you enjoy, right?
Yeah.
Because the things that I eat are going to look very different than the things that you eat. And what I found in my own personal experience now with patients is, if you start with what you enjoy, it's much easier to sort of work on what's going to look like sort of a balanced, nutritious diet for you. So focus on the things. I love oatmeal. I just heard from someone the other day that they despise oatmeal. They can't stand it. It's like their least favorite food. And I thought, well, telling that person to eat oatmeal is not going to be very
Yeah, exactly.
Just find the things that you naturally enjoy. And I do think that sometimes we can get so stressed out about our food choices. And then for me, I can tell you, and then I think about, okay, is this thing local? And what's the packaging? And you really can go down this rabbit hole.
Absolutely.
And you're at the grocery store for 2 hours and you still can't figure out.
Is it organic? Is it natural? Is it this? Is that? I mean, the list is so limiting that it paralyzes you.
It does paralyze you. So I think start with the things that you enjoy. And especially for kids, when I hear parents that are just so afraid that they're going to miss some key nutrient. And this might be kind of controversial to say, but I think that if it's going to give you peace of mind to provide your child with a good quality multivitamin, to just make sure I'm getting the zinc, I'm getting the iodine, I'm getting all those little things, it can just give you some peace of mind.
Yeah.
So, and the other thing I'll say is, our children, we want to be good role models for them, right? Like, so if they see us eating wholesome foods and enjoying fruits and vegetables and cooking, they're going to want to do these things. But they're really smart and they pick up on our anxiety.
Yeah.
And so if they see us being stressed out about food, guess what?
Yeah.
They're going to be stressed out about food. So you want to model this sort of ease and enjoyment around food. And one meal, one day is not going to make or break anything.
True.
So oftentimes with kids, parents will be so stressed out. They're like, he didn't have anything for breakfast, or he hasn't had a vegetable in a day and a half. It's okay.
Yeah. What you said is so critical, and that's something I kind of harp on, is creating an environment where your kids or your patients or your community recognizes that nutrition is important. Nutrition doesn't have to mean that you're going to lose taste. You're going to have a hard time in life. You can have great tasty food that's easy to access. And as far as losing things, realize that when you're actually just aware of eating more plants, you're not more than losing things. Even if you do it badly, you're gaining a lot, because you're getting rid of so much toxin and poison. That I'm using the word poison more generally, that's in the food that we don't think about by just consuming these fast foods. So that's a positive. And if you're worried about deficiencies, just being aware of a few of them can allay that fear significantly. Knowing that, B12, omega-3, calcium, iodine, a teaspoon of salt. Yeah. There is your iodine worries right there. Gone. Thank you. Half a teaspoon. Yeah. Well, I'm being generous there. Go. Just sprinkle some more on me. And so that approach, the big approach with this, food has to be tasty. It doesn't have to be, it's not expensive. You're not going to lose anything. In fact, you're going to gain by not having the negative things. I think that's such an empowering feeling. Yeah. Everybody knows that now, at least now, most people know that when it comes to brain development for kids, food is central. Food is essential. And that's why our battle is to kind of say, you don't have to worry about going plant centered or plant forward or whatever the word you want to use, or more unprocessed, you're going to gain so much. So we're so glad that you've actually brought in this beautiful book into this realm. Your incredible experience with children and with health. The world, I don't want to sound bombastic, but I will sound
It's
bombastic.
okay to sound bombastic.
Yeah, and the world is a better place because of you and this book. So we're so glad to have this conversation with you.
I love the fact that it's not just about nutrients and recipes, but you talk about joy and connection, and you talk about how important it is for us as the bigger collective, us as human beings on this planet too. I love that. You draw a beautiful bigger picture of why the small things we do every day matter, and I am grateful to you for that. This is a beautiful book, Nourish. Please get it if you haven't gotten it yet. It has an amazing section on the science and the application and the translation of that science too. Rishma, you are amazing. Thank you so much for your time and for being here with us. I hope this is the first of many conversations ahead. Dean and I feel like we know you already.
Yes.
I'm gonna put you up on that offer. I'm coming to your
Oh no,
I cannot
definitely.
wait. It's not an empty offer.
We have really nice, beautiful gatherings, beautiful conversations, and you would definitely add. We would love to have you here.
Come to our place, and I would love to cook for you.
Oh, I cannot wait. I cannot wait. We're sending you a lot
We'll
of
bring our
love.
entire audience with us, though. That's the one thing.
Yeah, everybody should come.
Everybody, yeah. The Brain Health Revolution.
Thank you so much, Rishma. We're grateful to
Thank
you.
you.
Really appreciate it. All right. Have a good day.
Have a great day.
I'll talk to you soon. Bye-bye. All right. Okay, this is wonderful. Thank you so much.